Greetings, humans. Welcome to the end of 2020 year-end roundup Q&A summary. I don't know. It's been, you know how it's been. Let me catch you up on some of the projects because I know there's been a gap between the last video I put out and here. It was supposed to come out rather quickly, but stuff happened. Mostly it was shipping delays, but we'll get to that. But first, let me talk about the Ender series. Yeah, remember that. The Ender series, that got bumped a little bit, and I said this in the Kingroon videos. It got bumped by the Kingroon videos a little bit because there's a lot of overlap going on there, and that Kingroon just kind of dropped into my lap. But meanwhile, the Ender has been, I'm not going to turn the camera and show it. The Ender has been doing production jobs. Right now, it's set up with a direct geared extruder, a volcano block, and it's printing ABS. So we'll see. I'll get back to that one. The overlap in that series was a lot of the mods that I did to that one I also did with the Kingroon. So I used the pretty much the exact same tensioner for the Y-axis belt. Spoiler alert, I put a tensioner on the Y-axis belt for the Kingroon. But yeah, reuse a couple of those things. I had stuff that I had tried on the Ender, as in like the cheap BMG extruders, more spoiler alerts. I tried out on that first. Those ended up some of the things that I tested on the Kingroon as well. So what I'm going to do is, since we're doing the Kingroon thing, I'll do the final Kingroon video, then hop back to the Ender. And if you recall, all those ages ago, I blew through a whole bunch of mods that I did during lockdown earlier in the year, like earlier in 2020, and said, what are you the most interested in? I compiled all of those questions and sort of made a list of mods that I wanted to talk about. Some of those being like, what do you think of 3-point leveling? Like, what do you think of, this and that and the other thing? So we'll do that. I don't know if I'll smoosh them all into one video and do like a supercut, or if I'll have to break stuff down. Maybe I'll do a supercut, and then if something's particularly interesting and I don't cover it during Kingroon video, I can do that in another video. First, the Kingroon video. So the intention was to do the final, ultimate digivolved form of the Kingroon. Ends up, what I'm probably going to do is, these are the things that ended up working for me to solve whatever problem. So then I could say, well, this is the problem that I had. This is how I went about trying to solve it. And this is the solution of those things that I tried that I ended up using. And then I'll show you the work. I'll show you all of my, failures and triumphs and that sort of thing. Save you all some time. Oh, my throat. Don't do a lot of talking when you're locked down alone in an apartment. Then we will do the final Digiform evolved, Kingroon, blah, 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 and wrap that whole series up. After I finish that, and maybe before I get to the Ender stuff, I think I'll leave a gap there so I can answer the Kingroon questions and then the Ender questions so I don't get confused in the comments. I will do a couple, I won't say non-3D printing videos because I use some 3D printed jigs and tools and things like that, but different subject matter altogether in the general maker concept of this channel. Couple guitar related videos I might do. As you may know, Eddie Van Halen died. I really wanted to do some kind of tribute for that, and it just so happens that I was planning to do a video on building a Frankenstrat, guitar, because it's something I've always wanted to do and just kind of haven't. So I'm going to do that. And then I also, for my birthday earlier this year, grabbed myself a headless guitar off AliExpress, one of those super cheapies that look like the Strombergs. But figuring that I would have to go through and fix a whole bunch of stuff, trying to see would it be worth paying the $1,000+ for a Stromberg, or grab this couple $100 guitar, put some work into it. Spoiler alert, the answer is it depends how much time how much money your time is worth. How much time, how much money time? Time, money? I stripped it down, fixed the bad parts. I could show you how I did that. I refinished it because the finish was atrocious, and, that's another one. And then there's all the stuff from the beginning, the late 2019 that I was like, next year we're going to blah, blah, blah. Then a pandemic hit and I never got to the oscilloscope testing and teardowns, the USB oscilloscope stuff, the custom firmware stuff, all that jazz. So anyway, that's looking forward. Those are the plans, the very, very tentative plans because reasons. So yeah, look forward to that. In the meantime, let's do a Q&A video. All right, let's try to do this. I have very little time. You'll notice I have the microphone in frame here. Very little time to do this because they're doing construction outside, but it's snowing right now, so I have no idea if they're going to show up or not. But usually the girl upstairs comes home about now and starts playing drums. So this is close in case I have some kind of interruptions like that. Maybe I can salvage the end of this. But this is where I just go through comments left mainly on YouTube right now and answer them for all of you. Typically, I will do a screen capture for this and show you the questions, but I'm just gonna read them because I don't, I had to do a bunch of software stuff and OBS isn't on there right now and I don't feel like messing with it. So I'm just recording this on a cell phone and dumping it straight in here. So I'm going to open up YouTube Studio, go down to the comments and okay, under the definitive, hopefully ramps 24 volt mod information and how-to guide, DIY family says, hello, do I need to change the driver's current in half for 24 volts or just leave it as it is? Just leave it as it is. Gary Laws under the one of the Ender videos. Oh, the chassis ground connection, electrical safety issue. I just got an Ender 3 Pro and I'm seriously considering upgrading it to dual Z-axis setup. However, there is concern with the power supply being grounded using 3D printed plastic brackets upon relocating the power supply itself. Is there a good source or resource for obtaining metal brackets to ensure the power supply is still grounded after the upgrade installation? I don't know what the grounding scheme is of the Ender Pro and the PSU there. The PSUs are conformally coated, so just touching it won't ground it, but the screws do ground it if they are passing through to some kind of metal device. So I assume you're talking about grounding the chassis of the power supply to the chassis of the Ender. If you were going to move that someplace where it's not against the frame, I would just make a little grounding pigtail and screw it into one of the little, I think they're, what are they, M3 or M5 holes. So whichever the holes you were using that to mount it into the frame, I think that's M5. Just, I don't know where you are. If you're in America, just go down to literally any hardware store, get the little electrical crimps and, you know, use that to ground it to the frame. It's probably the easiest way to do it. I don't know if I've done a video on that or not. I'm sure I've probably mentioned at some point in time, like, whether the ground is floating on the PC board respective to the chassis. I actually had a problem with that because of, well, when I eventually get to the mods I did during the COVID lockdown period for the Ender video, I will touch on how I blew out one of my motherboards by misguessing what their grounding scheme was. I actually ended up, it was floating. I thought they were at the same potential, but they were not. So the ground for the board was actually floating like minus 24 below the, is that board still here? Yeah, here it is. It's still sitting on my desk. It's one of the dusty. That's how long it's been here. It's one of the SKR E3 dips, the 1.0 guys. I liked those because they had the bigger memory for sure MCUs on there. But you'll notice I pulled the MCU off of there. So I was going to take the opportunity to talk about grounding using this as an example. And then while I was doing that, kind of, you know, rolling a bunch of things into one, talk about desoldering MCU ICs and then resoldering it, because this is perfectly fine, except that I think it was the ADC got blown out. So yeah, the problem was I got screwed by AliExpress. Surprise, surprise. And I might, where is it? Oh yeah, this is it. So I ordered some of the chips that go on here, as well as the STM32F400 series with the built-in floating processor and all that. So I ordered 5 of those, and I was going to experiment with upgrading this board to different processors, like see what it takes to go to like a beefier MCU and that sort of thing. Because a lot of times they're pin for pin compatible, and ST Microelectronics actually posts guide. Sorry, I'm probably maraca-ing this in your face the whole time. ST Microelectronics does post guides on how to migrate from certain chip families to certain other chip families, and they tell you which pins are compatible, which ones you have to watch out for, and that sort of thing. So anyways, at the very least, I was going to repair this board so that I didn't just throw it out. But they sent me 5 AM radio tuner chips instead of 5 microcontrollers. So yeah, thanks, China E-Post, AliExpress. I'm disputing this still. It's been a couple weeks, but hopefully I get my $25 back or whatever. Talking about the fake blue pill boards, with the counterfeit chips on them. Nyagentin, I think it's pronounced, says the simplest way to check if it's original or fake, debug it with Celiac or STM32 Cube. Yeah, that is an easy way to check that it's fake if you use the ST microelectronic stuff. They're like ahead of the times and behind the times. It's like they must have some kind of major segregation between their departments, because a lot of their tools are Windows only. And I'm like, who does microcontroller development on Windows? I mean, maybe they still do it overseas with like, Windows 95 and things like that. Mostly it's on like Unix systems here, or Linux systems, Unix like POSIX systems, that type of thing. So yeah, I don't know. So it's really weird when you go to download one of their specific tools and you're like, oh, now I got to run it under Wine. And then sometimes the call home networking stuff doesn't work. And you're like, just put out Linux tools like everybody else. Under one of the Kingroon videos, Z-Man says, I started getting failing printer stops after a while with the firmware unresponsive error. Any idea what's going on? No, I've never seen that before. I'm sorry. What I would do if I were you is go to, in that back to the basics video, I think it was the last Kingroon video I put out, I had the section on the GitHub links to the pre-compiled firmware for the various Kingroon machines, or just for the Robin, the Robin board that's in there from makerbase. I would go look at their pre-compiled stuff and the manual they have for it. I didn't mess with their pre-done software very much. I just put Marlin on it. Like I tried it for a little while. I was like, hey, it works fine. And then I just stuck Marlin on it. But anyways, that is to come. So anyway, I would look at their manuals and the troubleshooting guide, or at least do a full text search for firmware unresponsive and see what their troubleshooting steps are for that. I unfortunately don't have time to go look at it for you, and I'm not going to pretend that I know off the top of my head what that particular error means. Lots of people saying thanks for the fundamentals and firmwares guide for the Kingroon. That was the last video I did. That surprisingly divisive, that video. I had a lot of people that were like, yay, that's super helpful. And then a lot of people that were like, this is really dumb. Why are you covering this? Whenever you go and do that sort of basics thing, you're going to get it. But the main point of this board is, the main point of this Internet Bulletin Board BBS, getting old. Anyway, the main point of this channel is to support and give knowledge and empowerment toward doing these types of things. So I do think, since there's always going to be some noobs coming in that need some sort of basis to stand on before they get to the more advanced stuff, I try to at least touch on what I think is vital. So when it comes to like squaring up axes and whatnot, that's something where if you've been doing this for a while, you're like, well, yeah, that's the absolute first step, right? You square everything up and make sure that it's cool. A noob doesn't know that. Like, they're just going to pull it out and assume that it's okay. And sometimes it is. That type of thing should be done from the factory in a lot of these cases. But even if it's something like, an Ultimaker that costs $5,000 and should be correct from the factory, it's got to get there through shipping. And there's also human error and, mechanical problems and things. So you never know. You have to go and check the basics. And whenever I do the check the basics things, since there are bajillions of channels on, like 3D printers and that sort of thing, everyone will have their own way of showing you how to do stuff. I try to do it like the cheapest and dirtiest way, not necessarily the best way, but purposely different than other people would suggest, and without all the tools. So whenever you see me aligning things with like pieces of paper, or index cards, or something really cheap like that, or just using rulers to measure instead of something fancy, I do that because if somebody's buying like an 85, $125 printer, they probably don't have like $200 worth of like truing clamps and call belts and, like a set of squares and laser levels and all that kind of jazz. If you did, you don't need to talk to me. You already know how to align something. So if you've taken any carpentry or anything like that, but I try to go into it like assuming that you're not spending $100 on a set of, squares and calls just to align an $85 printer. Under the failing Omron mouse switch teardown and testing part 2 video, Gersberms says, "Hey Alex, I commented before that my Razer mouse with optical switches, maybe you remember. I do remember. This info is just FYI in case you wanted to know how it held up. I do, and that's why I'm reading this, because some other people might be interested in the optical switch mice. Because optical switches, if you don't know, those that series was about switches in particularly like Logitech. The story, I'll tell this after this question. This switch is failing prematurely for various reasons, and I just went through all the mechanical and electrical engineering behind why that is happening and let people draw their own conclusions and hopefully push the industry forward. That little video has actually given a kick in the arse to a lot of mouse manufacturers, which is really exciting for me actually, because it's not like I made $1 million off that video, probably made $20-30 in the course of that video, but the value of doing something like that to the world of like, computer peripherals and the billion-trillion dollar gaming industry is huge. So I'm glad to see people took that, stuck it on Reddit, ran with it, and that filtered down to a lot of different manufacturers. But when you're talking about like the optical switches, we're really in the first generation of that. The mechanical contacts won't fare. There are other mechanics that could fail in that. And first generation of all the supporting circuitry, we're in question mark territory. There be dragons. So yeah, that's why I'm interested to read this. I don't read these ahead of time too. I'm just reading them as you're reading them. And if I end up swearing or something on camera, then I edit it out. Anyway, the good news is that the optical switches still work perfectly. Nice. The bad news is that the mouse doesn't know how to charge a lithium battery, so I have to use it on a wire now. That stinks. They probably use some pre-rolled charging, IC solution. So that's a shame. That's definitely a warranty issue. The other bad news is that the back button is not an optical switch and it predictably has failed. That stinks. The third bad news is that the scroll wheel is hesitant, goes up and down between clicks. That stinks and scrapes, and that's annoying. So, the Razer Viper Ultimate $150 mouth isn't worth $150, but the main 2 buttons work flawlessly. It's also lightweight and the cable is good, and the white feet are absolutely excellent. Yeah, that's a shame. So like I said, first generation adopting new tech, you're going to have growing pains like that. It's a shame that like early adopters sometimes get screwed, but hopefully with information like this, the next generation get better. If you can still return that under warranty, then you should probably do that. But if not, just take it as a learning lesson or keep the shell. So this is, this was one of my Christmas presents to me. So, along with a mechanical keyboard that I'm not using. I'll have to make another video about that. But anyway, this is one of the Lightspeed Hero or regular, whatever, the Lightspeed G305 mice. Finally, those low current precious metal coated contact micro switches that I put in my Logitech before I recorded that failing switch video, they finally failed. And I use those same switches every day since then. And I play a lot of like click heavy games, do a lot of CAD work, a lot of clicking and dragging and holding and whatnot. They lasted a long time. And if you remember, I had the micro ZX series switches on the left mouse button, and I had the Japanese Omron on the right button. So yeah, finally, like a few weeks ago, they failed. And they didn't even fail spectacularly. It was just that every once in a while the click wasn't registering. It didn't have the click drag problem, because if you look at this video that this gentleman or ma'am or neither or both commented under, you can see how that, it clicks and the clicker is separate. It pushes on the spring that pushes it down instead of pushing on the main flex plate. So there is no such thing as like with those Omron switches where you have direct contact between the plunger and the little flex plate, the little snap plate, I think is what they call it, where it's going to be, you know, moving around while you're clicking and dragging. So there's no click drag problem. It was just registering problems. Anyway, I'll have to do a video about that. I got this one because I want to do a testing with the current generation of switches. There's a hair on there. Current generation of switches they use on this. I have it running in low power mode and see how long that lasts. Plus I saw a teardown video of these, and the switches are on little subboards. So that should be really easy to pull those out and test them and replace them with new ones and try it out and that kind of stuff. Not that like I'm thrilled about this mouse. It's, man, they design these mice for people that are like palm grip maniacs. I'm not. I'm a fingertip grip guy. So essentially the forward button is absolutely useless to me because I have to like choke up to get it. It also doesn't have the tilt wheel, which is annoying. I really need, I mostly use that for playing MMOs. I'm not playing MMOs right now because I don't have the time, A, and B, they all kind of suck these days. But, yeah, so I don't need that as much right now. But anyways, yeah, we'll see how it holds up, and then do a video about it, presumably. Also, under the Kingroon video, this was 3A, yeah, that same fundamentals, fixes, and firmware. Mauro Sands, am I saying that right? Said, Alex, my savior, today, after more than 1 year with bad filament cooling, I was able to adopt a good shroud for my printer. Very nice. Suddenly, some strange lines at certain heights began to appear. And then I remember seeing one of your KP3 videos, the Bang Bang hotbed. Yes. That was something like when I did the initial prints and saw those weird lines, I was, you know, went through all the wrong steps to solve it at first until I realized, oh, it's just it's a firmware issue. It's a setting. It's real easy to fix. So anyway, man, at the time I saw that video, I thought it was nonsense, that Alex is just overreacting to some detail, but this is really a thing. Yes, it is really a thing. If you haven't talked about it, oops, I'd be crazy right now. Thanks. Yeah, I went crazy when I had forgotten about it because I just automatically set up all my printers with Bang Bang heating now. And, yeah. Oh, and let me read the rest of the thing. This shows that the better you get at printing, the more the details matter. Yeah, it is true. That's that last sentence. Like when you fix a big issue, all of a sudden you recognize like a littler issue and a littler issue and a little issue. So you might have something like, you know, your weird uneven lines obscured by the fact that you have a weird Z-axis wobble that's giving you, you know, Z wobble on your Z-axis height. And then you're like, oh, you didn't even notice the Bang Bang bed bunching or like your nut binding up or something like that because it was obscured by a different issue. As far as the Bang Bang versus PID bed, even with PID, you can still have this problem, but for Bang Bang, it's worse. And this was an issue that I had. I'll talk about it in the next and maybe final. If this is a final Kingroon video, it's going to be really long because, like I said in that last updates video, I've been kind of dragging my feet, waiting to see if these parts would come in. I had said in December, like these things probably aren't going to be until January or February. Now we're toward the end of January going into February, and I have gotten some of those parts. I still haven't gotten others. Maybe they'll come, maybe they weren't. Maybe they'll show up as AM radio receiver chips instead of the things that I need. But regardless, I had adjusted this without paying attention to where I had adjusted the bed for one of the iterations of things I was doing. I had insulated it with some cork or silicone. I don't remember which I used. Some kind of dining trivet for your pans. But when I did the leveling the corners thing, one of the wheels was really loose and I didn't notice. So I had loosened it all the way up to try to get it to, you know, level properly against the nozzle for the homing the Z height. I should have just dropped the entire Z down, tightened all of them and done it again, but they were all the way up at the top of their height. I was either being lazy or just not paying attention. Regardless, because that one corner was goofy, even with the Bang Bang bed heating, it would act like a bimetallic strip and just that corner would go up. So I'm having this real weird extrusion issues, and I had eventually solved it when I swapped out the metal springs and I went with, what is it? Like a high temperature, is it vacuum tubing? It's either vacuum tubing or like not fuel line tubing, for, engines like motors. I went down to, you know, one of the car parts places and I got some high temperature silicone tubing, to use in place of the springs. Cause I thought maybe it was the springs, expanding and contracting unevenly that was making it. As soon as I put those on there, I noticed, or as soon as I went to put those on there, I noticed that one, finger wheel was flopping around. I was like, oh, so I cranked all of them down and that had solved the problem. So yeah. More Ender stuff. One Sylvia says, hi, do you know about a problem where the bed itself, not the legs, is unbalanced? Like the rear corner touches the nozzle on the front left, like 4 millimeters of separation like this, and then posted a Reddit video. Yeah, my bed, my Ender bed, there, I think if you, I don't remember it's in that video you posted under or the original assembly video, I said that it takes a dive in the back, so mine definitely tapers down. I was just compensating with that by adjustment at the time, but eventually during the lockdown, I lapped, like ghetto lapped that bed flat. Yeah, I lapped it by taking spray adhesive on the back of, you know, emery paper, putting that on like marble, not paving slabs, like tile, which very flat, like mirror finished stuff that I just grabbed surplus from somewhere, and you know, kind of the whole thing took forever and it was a huge mess, but I wanted to get rid of that dive. It's not the end of the world, and you can fix that by using a different build platform, like if you put a like a glass bed on it or something like that. But if you have it clamped all around, the problem is your glass bed is going to take a dive a little bit too if it's really severe. So yeah, just take some kind of straight edge and see if it rocks on your bed corner to corner. Make sure your bed is flat, because it might not be. Also, it's very possible that the tension on your bedded height adjustment springs in the four corners is super wonky. So if you have some cranked way down, you could actually be bowing the bed, even if it's not the two corners that you're interested in. If you tighten these two corners down and you're bowing it horribly this way or that way, that'll kind of, you know, like a Pringle chip, sort of like taco the thing, so that you have either a rise or a dive on the other one. So yeah, just loosen up all of those, make sure that it's flat. If it is, then it's just spring tension. So fix the spring tension. If it's not, if it's totally wonked, then, you either just have to kind of compensate for it. I mean, if you have a leveling probe, that can compensate somewhat. But if you're not, if you're just doing, you know, standard Z leveling with the corner springs, then get a build plate. Also on the failing micro switch, Robert Mosch says, thanks to you, my MX518 has a new lease on life. Yay. I think I have one of those right here. Yeah, old school. This thing's been through the war. Look at that. Wear the logo off. I don't use this because that one good, that one dead. So yeah, maybe someday I'll fix this one too. Apparently I took it apart at one point in time. I have like 3 of these though, because this was the only choice you had back then if you didn't want to use like an office mouse. Anyway, new lease on life, and my 502 Hero has the clicking and drag issue. G502, not the Hero version, but I practiced on the 518 first and fixed the non-working one. Yeah, if you're going to do the 502, the big thing to watch out for is the... Come on, what are you stuck on? Hopefully you can see this. The big pain in the butt, because I've taken this apart like 3 times. The big pain in the butt taking it apart and getting it back together is the wacky scroll wheel here. I don't know. This is not the Hero. The Hero ones have a slightly redesigned scroll wheel. Get that in frame. This is the old magnesium all metal wheel. I actually like this better than the improved wheel. I don't know. I like the fact that it has a lot of weight and you can, you know, as opposed to something like this. It's like, Anyway, yeah, if you're going to be a big, clunky, heavy freaking mouse, just own it. But regardless, yeah, that was the biggest pain in the butt. I mean, it's a kind of a pain in the butt dealing with the little like side button boards and all that kind of jazz, but getting this back together and clicking properly was the biggest deal. So just be careful about that. A lot of people asking about optical switches under that video. Kevin R., could you review a Razer optical mouse switch? Yeah, it appears, as you saw from the previous comments, that people are having some problems with that first generation of boards. If I find one like cheap on eBay, I'll mess around with it, but I don't have the cash to just go, buying mice to review. I mean, I got this one on sale. I don't remember how much it was. It was cheap. It was like $35 or $40 or something like that. But I'll keep an eye out. I'd like to look at some optical stuff. I'd like to look at some of the optical keyboard switches too, actually, but they're a bit rare still. When they start coming out more popularly, I'll deal with it. Brandon Ike under the Kingroon videos. When are we getting next video? Been binge watching your videos. LOL. You're very knowledgeable. I actually replied to that. I said, been held up by a few things, hoping for this week. A few segments included have their fate in the hands of the mail service. Yeah. So some of the, I don't remember what I have to pull up the list. I haven't looked at it in a week or so. Some of the things that were held up in the mail service were drag chain. I was going to do a drag chain, but I ordered small drag chain and I got like this monster and I was like, oh, no, sir, not at all. So yeah, scrap that idea. I'm not going to reorder that and wait again. And I'm not going to pay, full price on Amazon for it. Excuse me. I was waiting for some things to come from Texas and they actually came in, from Zyltech, ZYLtech. I'm just going to call them Zyltech. I got this, which is a Palm Acme nut. I guess it's not Acme, trapezoidal thread nut. But people were asking about the anti-backlash stuff. And you don't really need anti-backlash for this. I didn't have any problems with that, but I'm going to do a whole section on the Z-axis with various things that I experiment with and show you the results. And one of them is an anti-backlash nut. The one that I had was at first was just one of the cheapies that I ordered off Amazon, and the threads were cut so poorly that putting the backlash nut on it made the printing so much worse. It went from having, minimal Z-axis problems to putting that on, and it was just a nightmare because it was binding up. So I ordered this guy because, first of all, much lower friction coefficient. Usually, like the decent Acme nuts are sintered bronze or impregnated with oil and that type of thing if they're self-lubricating. Or they're going to synthetic nuts these days, but these are Delrin or Palm or whatever you want to say. Quasi self-lubricating, but a much lower friction coefficient than the cut brass threads, which I'll put under a microscope for the video and show you how poorly they are cut. So I have not tried this yet, but that's one of the things I have to get to. And that did actually come in a few days ago. So thank you, Zyltech. For the Ender 3 alignment problems, Ambergree said, I would love to see something similar for the Ender 5. I have one of those box frames and it makes it difficult to do a lot of the alignment. There's too many constraints and existing screws to get it perfect in my experience. So I'm often trying to split the difference and make the imperfections symmetrical across the axis in question. Yeah, I actually prefer box frame printers, but they don't show up well on video because they have a bunch of crap in the way and I don't have a lot of room here. So I only have one box frame printer and it's kind of half disassembled and stuck up on a shelf because I just don't have enough room here. Hopefully this year I'm going to be moving to a bigger space, but we'll have to see about that. It was supposed to be last year, but plague. But yeah, as soon as you go from 2 uprights to 4 uprights, all of a sudden you have one more contact area than you strictly speaking need, and alignment becomes much more of an issue because it's not just 1 versus 2 or 1 versus 2 versus 3. So like 3 points in space, but then you have that 4th one. So all of a sudden you have skew, as opposed to just, skew, if that makes any sense. But yeah, it is much more of a pain in the butt. So yeah, I'll do box frame stuff when I get more room. I've been saying that for years that I'll be doing, you know, the Core XY and HBot and cross gantry style printer evaluations and, you know, kinematics video breakdown when I get into a bigger space, but that's just the way that it goes. On the cheap linear rail review, where I go through the really crappy linear rails I got off of, I don't remember what I was. I think I got one off of Banggood, one off of AliExpress, and one off of eBay. I don't recall. That was years ago. Banana Mustang says, I must have restarted doing 6 different carriages. Each one is just binding too much, no matter how much or how little I grease and lube. I double checked the bearings and ensured the new ones look like they went through the channels just fine. It's turning into more trouble than it's worth at this point. I spent 10 minutes cycling the cart, running a rail back and forth, hoping that it would loosen up and cycle. So in my experience back then with those linear rails, the newer linear rails are much better. I don't know if I have one to show you. Okay, this is one of the bad ones. This was a carriage I did for a project on the Ender. This was one of the bad ones, like from that video. You can hear it. Kind of nasty. Even after it was rebuilt. But the races on the cart were so bad. If you're looking at that, I think I did the microscope, you know, pictures on that video. So bad and pitted and crunchy that depending on luck of the draw, you could either get a good one or a bad one. Oh, and also the little metal clip things that hold the little bearing retainer clips. Some of those were bent kind of weird so that they bowed in the middle, and they were keeping the balls from properly circulating, and it would scrape back and forth. So that's another thing you want to check. If all of that, it looks okay and you're still binding up, it's probably just really poor tolerances on those. And I would just look into getting a new cart. I mean, it sucks to have to buy a new one, but the newer ones, they're like $25. The ones that I did in that video were like $8 and a couple years ago. So like I said, the new ones are a lot better now than they were. I'll be looking at some of those in the next Kingroon video. If you want to take a peek at that, I'll do some microscope shots of them and I'll tell you which ones they were and put a link in the video description. Olisender N says, hi, thank you for sharing this. Which printer gives better quality prints, the KP3S or the Bang for the Buck handmade one? The Bang for the Buck handmade one. But there was a lot more work and adjustment that went into that. I'll get into, maybe I'll reference this in that final video. There are a couple fundamental problems that I have with the KP3S. Some of them I overcame with mods. Others are just inherent in the system. But the only real problem I had with that Bang for the Buck printer was I was not happy with the Y-axis. And that was a combination of the really crappy linear rails, like I just talked about in the previous video. So that could be solved by upgrading to the newer crappy linear rails. And the heat deflection of some of the materials I used, like I said, if you watch that video, I ordered a bunch of that stuff from AliExpress and they're a little fudgy on the specifications. So the carbon fiber that I use for the Y-axis didn't have the heat deflection that they claimed it did. Also, the adhesive that I used didn't have the heat deflection that it claimed it did. So it was just a bunch of things that technically would have been fine if they were the way that I thought they were, the way that the manufacturers or the middlemen said they were, but they weren't. So the problem I had was if I heated the bed, the carbon fiber would lose a lot of its mechanical rigidity, which is not so great. Also, because of the fact that the linear rails were so scritchy, and I was using the Trinamic TMC 2208s running in quarter stepping with the additional interpolating smoothing. It was just with the Y-axis. Obviously, that's a lot of noise. And when you hit that resonant frequency where it's, you know, kind of self-sustaining, you get that like ringing a bell sort of a deal. And that's obviously going to translate to the prints. But, you know, the belt system on that, much better than the Kingroon. The extruder, much better. The cooling, much better. So yeah, but I do a whole lot of stuff in the last Kingroon mods video, so you might want to take a look at that. And there are a lot of things in there that'll apply across the board to many different printers. So check it out regardless. John D, thumbs down for the super loud, stupid intro. You're stupid, loud, John. Shane says, talking about the Kingroon videos, another use for that Bowden tube is a sort of reverse Bowden. You attach it at the hot end at the other end of the frame, and the hot end won't pull and push the filament off the spool. Yeah, I actually did that exact thing with the new setup that's on there, which I guess I can show right now. Yeah, let's take this camera for a little ride and show you what this, ooh, behind the scenes stuff. Oh, now I messed the focus all up. Why is my head compressed like a kidney bean? Anyway, on the world's jankiest DIY water-cooled hot end setup, but it works. Consequently, I did find the limits during my, Ender COVID lockdown mods experiments thing. I did find the thermal limits of that super janky water-cooled hot end test, upgraded it to some, AliExpress stuff, and so that I could use a Volcano hot end. I will eventually put that video out. So many videos I need to do and so little time I have to work on them. I have 3 working closed loop PC coolers. They're very efficient at overclocking. The pump is located inside the water block, and the block weighs a ton because of the infinity mirror illusion. I am curious, should I use them? Should I use one for water cooling the power supply? I would be more apt to use one for cooling the power supply than the hot end, just because who is it that owns the patent on the pump inside the block? Is it NZXT or Cooler Master? I don't remember who it is. One of them owns the patent for putting the pump inside the block that fits on top of your CPU or GPU or whatever it is. Anyway, they are real heavy and bulky because of all of that. I would probably say no, but if you're not using them for anything, or if you run them so much that the coolant inside has gone bad, you can reuse the radiator and the fans and the power supply, or the excuse me, the radiator and the fans and the barbs if they have removable barbs. Sometimes they don't with CLCs. I'm not sure. But you could definitely reuse all that, put new tubing on it, and then use the water block that I am going to show you in that video eventually when I get to it. Oh, Peter Evans posted a whole bunch of comments about how he doesn't understand. Why did you post the same? You literally posted the same comment under 2 or 3 different videos. Anyway, I have no idea how you are breaking a printer immediately after purchasing it. I commented on another video. I touched nothing on the printer whatsoever and made 127 flawless prints without doing anything whatsoever. Moreover, whatsoever, I have no idea whatsoever why you messed it up to ruin the printing results whatsoever. All I did was jam the plastic whatsoever wheel on the roller. He didn't say what's. I'm making fun of all the whatsoevers in the first one. Sorry, I'm just having a little fun. Blah, 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 blah. So I'm glad you had great success with yours. I didn't have great success with mine. I had okay success. And if you remember in the first video, I kind of said, I expected this to be a freaking nightmare for I don't know what it is now, probably like 130, 150 bucks, which is creeping into Ender territory and getting sketchy. But when I bought it, it was like 85, and I thought it was going to be a disaster. It ended up being okay. A little boneheaded on some things, but that's what we're going to fix in a mod deal. And not perfect, obviously. I had some issues. Mostly the issues out of the box, though, were just kind of squaring and alignment and some quality issues. But the thing is, are you saying you bought this printer, took it out of the box, and printed 100 somethings with the stock fans? Because those are freaking loud. That was the thing that I had the most complaints about. That and the cooling was utter garbage. But man, I couldn't stand that thing for any more. I had to do a set of initial test prints to see what the quality was. But literally, my ears were ringing. I probably did permanent hearing damage from that. I do a bunch of sound pressure level testing that I'll put in the next video, but whew, man, 127 prints with those fans is brutal. I've done much more than 127. I have bins and bins of test prints that I did on a thing, but after I replaced the fans, fixed some of the ZX's stuff, did some mods and whatnot. So yeah, the problem with a comment like that is it's a sample size of 1. And I understand that like my printer is also a sample size of 1, but that's when you try to go through and say, okay, well, let's look at all the little details and say, you may or may not have this problem. If you do, here's the solution. If you don't, delightful. Move on to the next, section or whatever. Talking about squaring up the KP3S, Bill Caroloy, I think that's Caroloy. Yeah. Bill Caroloy says, replace the base with extrusions. I thought about that. The problem, one of the cool things about this printer is that it has that machined steel base. One of the problems with this printer is that it has a machined base, and I got around it in a couple different ways, but it would have been a lot easier if the base were just open frame extrusions. It's nice that you hide all the electronics in there. I guess it's a real pain in the butt, and you have to flip it upside down and unscrew the bottom plate to get to any of the giblets. That was a real pain in the butt. So yeah, it is feasible, but then you have to worry about all the alignment problems and where you're going to mount the screen and the electronics and all that type of stuff. And by then you might as well just buy an Ender, right? So those are the problems I have with those types of mods. So what I focused on was more keeping it the way it is and bolting things onto it instead of replacing the whole deal, because that was one of my initial thoughts too, was this would be so much easier if I just took the chassis, threw it out, and put some 40/40 extrusions down there and bolted everything to it. Decided not to go that route. But yeah, that is something you could do, is just use all the parts to basically rebuild it into a cantilevered Ender type of a deal. Okay, I know I have many, many more questions, but YouTube will not let me scroll down anymore. Sorry. I'll do another Q. I'll try to get back to doing them once a month or so, but I cannot scroll down any further. This only goes back 2 weeks too. Look, I know I have like 2.5 months of questions that I have to get through. Yeah, so the last question I get to is a second question from Bill Caroloy. He says, I don't like the belt situation on the Y-axis. Looks like maybe the bearing assembly won't hold a tighter belt. I wrote back at the time a few weeks ago and I said, you are correct, sir. The belt situation is there is a, what do they call them? They have a couple of different names, but it's a metal post that's threaded on one side and usually hex shaped on the other with a ridge. It's basically a rivet. So a lot of times you'll use them as like grounding posts or something like that instead of like threading and tapping like a standoff. Anyway, they use one of those electrical like grounding post type of things to mount the idler pulley for the Y-axis on. The problem is if you're talking about mounting something on a flexible, piece of metal, like a thin piece of metal, that's one thing if it's flush against it. Every time you pull that out, you're giving it more mechanical advantage because you've formed a lever. So that rivet forms a lever that's out like several centimeters and it flexes the entire case. So first thing when I was trying to mess around with the improving the prints on this deal, I was like, okay, how can I easily tension the Y-axis belt that's located inside the chassis and don't have a lot of room? Oh, well, throat's going anyway, so I guess I couldn't read more stuff. Regardless, so what I did was I 3D printed some little curved pieces that I could slide over the belt, like tension the belt, slide that on, and it'll, tighten it up a little more. But then I noticed that as I added tension, that rivet was, bending forward and the entire side of the chassis was flexing as well as the motor mount for the Y-axis flexing. So I ended up taking that rivet off of there. Spoiler alerts for the video, but I'll show all this. So yeah, Bill was right though. There was a lot of flex. So once you add tension, it was pulling it to the point where I was getting weird artifacting along the Y-axis. And I thought it was VFAs, like the artifacts you have on like, some Prusa printers and other TMC 2130 and 2208 printers, but it wasn't. It was actually the belt rubbing against that pulley inside. I didn't hear it because of the fans and the fact that it was inside the metal enclosure. But when I opened it up, there was a whole bunch of like rubber dust from it, you know, rubbing off. And it was all because that rivet had bent forward and it was skewed and rubbing along the sides of the bearing. So yeah, ended up replacing all of that with a 3D printed tensioner, which I will post all of the files in the next video so you can try it out yourself. Sorry I couldn't get to all the questions that I wanted to, but that means I might not have to as mercilessly cut down and edit my ums and uhs and the in-between pieces here, so it'll save me a little bit of time. Anyway, whew. Final, maybe Kingroon video coming soon. I may have to spin off some of the stuff into a separate video, like all of the Z-axis stuff. Like just doing that is going to take like probably 15 minutes. All the configurations for the firmware and the screen and whatnot. Like that's probably 10 or 12 minutes, maybe. Then messing with the hot end stuff is probably 20 minutes. I did a whole lot with the hot end and the cooling. So we'll see. We'll see. I have to figure out how to do it. Somebody suggested I do a poll. Maybe I'll do a poll for that, or just record the whole thing in one big long segment and then see if there are logical places I can just splice it and spin off other little videos whenever I have time to do it. Like I said, drummer upstairs, jackhammer outside. The bar across the street is now quasi open as long as they do outdoor dining, but drunks outdoors are much louder than drunks indoors. So that's not making me very happy. So anyway, regardless, catch you in the next one.